All right, we are live. So today I have some special guests. I have Chad from Dripping Springs, Texas, and Chris Dominski, who's up in Muskegon right now at the Fab Lab, right? Right, Chris? So we've got our two special guests they're either running Makerspaces or they've run into lots of great stories about how they started their Makerspaces. So we're gonna take a tour, hopefully, with Chris too, who can walk around. I think Chad, your space is in construction, right? It's still being worked on. Yep.
Correct.
So we'll get just kind of a visual description of what your space will look like. But Chris, you've shown just before this some of the video or some of the footage of your makerspace, which is really, really awesome. So I just want to just real quickly go through. Let me find the right here. So Chris, Chad, and I met by chance when, because of COVID, we wanted to use our 3D printers. We just happened to be three people that had 3D printers that somehow saw a post or wanted to print PPE for the world and help people out. So we signed up our 3D printers, and what's really cool is, my part of this was creating these. I'm a data guy, and I like to do BI reports, right? Chris jokes about this. It's like Charles and his data. But one of the cool things is I made this report to showcase all the people that signed up for our efforts. And what we have here is we have 5 in Dripping Springs, Texas. So that's Chad, that's you on the map. And then unfortunately for us, Chris, we're lumped into these big bubbles. So one is in Holland, and then one is Grand Rapids. And I think, Chris, you took all the printers and you had how many at your house at one point?
12, I think.
12 3D printers, right? So, what's interesting about Chad is I think you were printing and sending them to us. And then there was a period when we were doing the face shields for the group in Puerto Rico, and you were using your laser cutter to help with that effort. And then I remember you came in with a request because you had to 3D print for your school too, but it was too many. So you asked our group to send visors down your way.
That's right.
So there was like trades going on all over the place. And Chris, I think you initiated an effort to help the group in Ann Arbor, and they just sent that package, right? They flew a bunch of visors down to somewhere in South America. Is that right?
They were just like they were up last night late punching them out, just like we were doing over at Hybrid in Holland there with a paper cutter and stuff. So they worked all night, I guess, to get it done so it could get on the flight. And yeah, so that's going down to another place in Central America.
Yeah, that is so awesome. Like we've done so many efforts like that where we've shipped stuff overseas. And I remember there was a request from Hawaii, and they requested like 5 visors, and I think we sent them 50 because we were like, we're not, why are we shipping 5 to Hawaii? We'll send them 50. So just a huge collaborative effort to 3D print, and we'll talk a little bit about it too. But 3D printing was so amazing because injection molding takes weeks to set up and get all the mold and the tools and everything set up. But with I remember with the 3D printers, it was, I think we sent out an email, and you could take the email, load it on your machine, and 10 minutes later you could be, if your printer was heated up, you'd be printing, right? So the turnaround time, the lead time was just so incredibly fast. I have a lot of people ask about, are there about 3D printer farms? They didn't realize. So yes, there are 3D printer farms. The one that Prusa has, if you search for 3D printer farms on YouTube by Prusa, Prusa, you'll see this one. He's building a new one with more printers, but he's got 180 printers just printing parts for more 3D printers. And I heard this story. I think Joseph Prusa said this, is like when he gets an order, he can just walk down and grab all the parts off the printers that are printing, put them in a box, and ship them. Right. So it's just an incredible effort of 3D printers printing other parts for other 3D printers. And I have a story too. Is I remember I had a 3D printer. It was a Prusa. We had one part that broke. I emailed Prusa. They emailed me the file. I printed that part because it was a bracket that wasn't an integral part. And I printed the replacement on the printer that was broken, and I stuck that bracket on. And I was like, this is crazy. This printer is printing its own replacement, right? So
we had that happen at the print farm for 30C19 when I was there one day helping Jeff. Somebody from like Grand Rapids showed up, and they were like, hey, I don't know anybody else that has 3D printers. Can you guys 3D print me this part? Because I can't print anything without this part. So he waited an hour, and real quick, boom, I gave it to him.
You printed a part for somebody. Amazing. Yeah, there's so many stories. Like, this is so crazy. And I just wanted to showcase, and maybe you can give us a little tour, Chris. Let's start out with so your website. So you run the Lakeshore Fab Lab in Muskegon. There's looks like curbside. I think you do some online lessons right now. And you've got 3D printers, laser etching, and I think you can show us one of your plasma machines, right? If you walk us around a little bit. So let's do a quick tour.
When you walk in, so over there is where my desk is.
Oh yeah.
Main entrance, you walk in, we have tables of all the awesome stuff that we make here.
Oh, right? Cool.
And this is kind of the lab area. That's Daniel. I'll have him introduce himself if he wants to.
Yep.
He was kind of like one of the first volunteers. Now he works for us for the lab. This is our laser cutter, just about a medium-sized one, 60 watt. It's not too crazy. We got a couple crickets.
What size laser do you have, Chad?
So we have a 40 watt.
40. Okay. So
yeah, same make.
If we can ever open again, I kind of want to get a bigger one.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, we have a couple of crickets. We got those, and they were popular with some of our homeschool groups.
Yeah.
Just because like the moms or the grandmas that would come in, a lot of times with the kids, knew how to use them.
Yeah. I've been using those for the mass. We can cut heat transfer vinyl, and then I iron them on. What are you using them for, Chris? Are they using them for stencils or like cutting cardboard?
Decals mostly.
Decals.
And for me, they're a good training exercise for how to teach people how to like make vector art. And if no one understands what that means, vector art is used in like the graphic design industry. Like, you create a file in Corel Draw or Adobe Illustrator, it's going to be a vector file.
Yep.
So crickets kind of teach you that on a lower cost scale, because we have a large format vinyl plotter in this room, our computer lab. Whoops, that guy.
Oh, wow.
So that can cut and print just like a Cricut, but it's a $30,000 Cricut. So and these rolls sometimes are really big. So, when little Billy or Susie comes in and wants to make like one sticker, I'm like, all right, little Billy and Susie, you don't need to load on like a 54-inch wide roll for your one little dog sticker.
So that's why you got the crickets for
right,
the small
right.
ones.
And in here we have our industrial 3D printers. So we have a couple U-print machines.
U-print.
They print ABS. They print really well. They're filament based too. We have an older Dimension Elite. It's kind of the predecessor to these two guys.
Okay.
And then really the crown jewel of the space is this guy. Like, this is the most expensive piece of equipment we have, and it's the Stratasys Fortis 450.
Yeah.
It has a pretty good, tremendous build volume. It's $200,000 piece of equipment that, prints like a beast when it gets going.
Really? Wow.
But that thing can do, it's still a filament base, so it can do ABS, nylon, polycarbs, this material called Ultem, which is like an aerospace material. We haven't done any of that. It's like $800 a roll.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then this is our lab where the members can come in and use software. We'll teach classes in here.
Yeah.
As you can see, we kind of got it like sectioned off for social distancing right now.
Yeah.
For whenever we can actually do that again.
So, and right now you can't, right?
No, not yet.
Okay.
And all these 3D printers back there, the CR10's right here on this like middle workbench. Those were all right here before, but we kind of spread them out through the lab so that if we ever are, able to open to the public again shortly, there's a 6 feet between each printer.
Yeah.
Here's like boring stuff, right? Like material storage and whatnot. I say boring, but it's very important, and it wasn't well thought for the space. Even when I first started, I didn't think about it, but soon we started to get all this material, and we're like, they didn't think about where we were going to store this stuff. So boring stuff like that. I've talked to people who are starting makerspaces. I said, have a plan for what you're going to do with those 54-inch rolls of vinyl. Have a plan for what you're going to do with stacks of plywood. Like, as boring as it is, like, it's got to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I wanna note that too, because Chad is setting up his new makerspace or his technology lab, and he's having all kinds of setup issues, right? And I wonder if Chad, you accounted for kind of storage for materials and stuff too, is part of the planning.
Right. I mean, we have sort of planned as part of the lab. We have storage rooms where we'll be storing, materials. Wood is going to be interesting because when you're dealing with wood, you're dealing with sheets, you're dealing with offcuts, and to try and figure out how to optimize and find them easily is definitely a challenge, right? And so, we're looking at. We built our own cart. I have a mentor who helps me out, and he recently went and made a couple of carts where we can put the sheets in, we can put the offcuts and all that. So we'll be using that inside the new lab also, right? But yeah, our biggest challenge really has been, and still probably is when you're dealing with 3D printers, when you're dealing with laser cutters and engravers, plasma, there's a lot of fumes that you really want to extract out of the building because it's not really safe to sort of, especially when you're cutting things like acrylic, although it's not carcinogenic, you really don't want to breathe that in. So one of the biggest challenges is, okay, so we got this huge space. How do we put in dust collection and extraction into the building so that when we bring in new equipment, and we don't know what equipment's will be coming in 3 years' time or 4 years' time, where we're going to put them? So do we have then, with that equipment, the ability to extract and purify the air, whatever it might require? So those are sort of challenges that you're facing when you're building something like this, because cost can be pretty high if you're going to try and come up with a solution that is going to work 80-20 industry rule, right? I want it to work 80% of the time, and is it going to make it work? I don't know.
Interesting. So Chris, so you've had challenges with the logistics of the material, if that's not planned for. And interestingly, Chad, you're dealing with logistics of kind of the air. You got to clean the air out of the lab and get it out and cleaned out. So planning ahead of time potentially for that if you start a makerspace. Let me ask a little bit about the business side of things. So we've tried to start a makerspace here in Holland for quite a while. There's a maker group, but I think we looked at the subscription model, and it was just how do we set up the business entity? Was it nonprofit, or how do we set that up? And I think they ran the numbers, and we just didn't have enough people. And I wanted your take on this, Chris, and then Chad, you too, on how it was set up at your schools. That's a little bit different, but both of you kind of started in a school environment, which kind of blends in nicely. But and I think, Chris, you had mentioned once that it's starting to get steam, but one of the things you were interested in is the Surge program, which is kind of teaches you how to run a business. Maybe there's some gaps there that you had some things that you wanted to learn. So maybe we'll start with Chris and then go to Chad about the business side of that and starting this up. What are the things you're seeing? How did you build up steam that you said, before we got it to COVID?
Well, it's funny because I just actually talked with Amanda and some of the mentors this morning about the Surge program. So we'll see.
Perfect.
It seemed like I might be a good fit.
Yeah.
But we'll see, But yeah, that's where my skills lack, because I went to school for engineering, right? Like I'm not a teacher. Although I'm pretty good at it now, working with kids and stuff. I'm not a business guy. But that's why I go to like networking events and, startup weekend events, stuff like that, just to kind of like, network and meet people. And it's really, that's been my biggest strength here is, you have to get people, early adopters in, like Apple, right? Like the people who want the new iPhone, you got to get the early adopters into this place, and they're your biggest praisers or preachers about, what you're doing. I mean, we had some of those good success stories, and that's the hard part about now is a lot of those people, a lot of them are actually older retired engineers. One of them actually is a retired Hollywood sculptor. Like he worked on movies, and he lives in Muskegon now. It's crazy.
Wow.
We have a retired doctor who's actually my CNC router expert. But they can't really be around here yet, because we're not open, or their personal health issues because they're older and they're retired or something like that, so they're in that higher risk category. So that's kind of the hardest thing right now in dealing with that.
So interesting. So I think what you're saying though is networking has been a huge thing for you, and targeting the early adopters, the people that really are interested, passionate with the new technology. And it sounds like you've been able to connect with them, and they go out and kind of share and sell for you, right? And they bring more people, word of mouth, referral type of stuff. So interesting.
In January, February 2019, I went to this networking event that this guy puts on a lot of time in Grand Rapids. He called it, the group's called the Under Network. I didn't know much about it, but I was like, all right, let's try this out. Let's meet some new people. And, through meeting him, his wife one day shows up. He kept telling her she needed to get down here because she homeschools. And she finally comes in, and then she's like, so if we get memberships, can I just like homeschool my kids here and like they can use the technology? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so it was a couple awkward weeks because we didn't really understand that ebb and flow, right? And then at the peak of before COVID, we had a whole day dedicated basically to homeschool kids and families that could come in and use the space. But that wouldn't have ever been possible if I hadn't really gone. I wouldn't have discovered that if I didn't go out and meet people and find what their needs are, their pain points, and so.
Wow. So Chris, you may say you have a gap, but it sounds like you're a natural businessman. So, so Chad, we're going to jump to you. So tell us a little bit about your story. I think you mentioned that you had worked at Apple at one point, right? And you were in technology, in the industry. You started teaching, and you kind of told us a little story about that. And then you jumped from teaching and went full teaching, right, at some point. Kind of walk us through your story and your why. Why did you switch to teaching?
Absolutely. I mean, so I like Chris. I am a engineer. I'm a computer science major, and I have been involved. Well, I was involved with startup businesses for a long, long time, probably 24 years. And with startup businesses, we had contract with Apple in Cupertino, and eventually in the mid 90s, I was hired by Apple in Cupertino to work on the DVDs. So introducing those inside the laptops and the desktops. So that was my sort of brief at Apple was, working on DVD programming, bringing that into the desktop and laptop arena.
Now that's obsolete because I have a laptop that doesn't even have a drive in it.
Exactly, right? I mean, technology changes every day. When you think that you have the latest and the greatest, there's new thing around the corner that is just waiting for you, right? So anyway, I retired in 2004, moved back to Texas, but got bored sitting at home. And I did have my own side business. I was making, IoT is big today, but back in mid 2000, I built a board that allowed you to communicate with basically home entertainment systems that had serial interfaces. I don't know if you know RS-232. So we were basically built a board that was Ethernet, and you can send commands over the Ethernet to the serial interface on, let's say, a DVD player with a serial interface. so you could actually control, the functions of the device. So that's a little side business, but when you working from home, and you're not interacting with people, that gets pretty interesting very quickly. So I decided I was going to. My kids were pretty young at the time, and I thought, okay, I want to spend time with my kids, but at the same time, still continue with technology because that is really where I come. My background. I mean. So anyway, I decided there was a job going on at the school district in IT infrastructure. So I took the job in 2007, and pretty quickly they found out that I knew how to program and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So in 2010 they lost a computer science teacher, so I had to step in until they could find another teacher and take over the class for a semester. And that happened again the following year. So I decided that at that point, I might as well get a teaching certificate and start teaching. So I started teaching 2012 as a full-time teacher. And
so just to summarize, 2004 you retired, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then 2010.
I graduated high school then.
but now you're working full time as a technology engineering department teacher.
Right.
So you went full circle. You retired and then came back in. But the in summary, it sounds like you wanted to be at the school where your kids were. You wanted to engage with kids. You wanted to get back out of the house because being at home was you're not interacting with people, but you also wanted to connect with technology, right?
Right. Exactly.
Wow.
So it enabled me to sort of, as you say, keep abreast with what is going on in technology, but also at the same time, I was spending time with my kids during the summer breaks and stuff like that. So
good point.
The situation, right? All around.
Yeah. Cool. So I'm gonna transition to Chris, but we're gonna come back because I want to touch base with you on the Python programming. I think there's some audience members are interested in that, but we're gonna jump to Chris real quick. So Chris, speaking of following your why, maybe taking an adventure and trying something new. I think I saw a post that you've been a DJ before. Is that correct?
Yeah, back in my heyday.
And so do you still, I notice your email is still DJ Crisco or something?
That's like my primary email, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that, man.
So back in high school, I just started to get really big into like hip hop and turntablism, and I got some starter tables. I don't even remember the exact moment I got into it, right? But I just started to hear this music, and I'm like, whoa, you can make the scratches and those noises with records, like that's cool. And so I got some cheapy starter ones and got into it, and I eventually upgraded or whatever throughout high school. My senior picture has me in next to my turntables. That's kind of unique.
I think I saw that on Facebook. Yeah,
probably, yeah, one of the throwback Thursdays, right?
Yeah.
I wonder why I wasn't popular. But so I did some competitions actually with Guitar Center. Didn't go so well. Nerves. But I jumped out and put myself out there a couple times.
So what do you mean competition Guitar Center?
So Guitar Center is a place, I think they're nationwide, but there's one in GR. They do music equipment they sell and whatnot. So they sell turntables, they'll sell lights and guitars and all that stuff. But they would host what they call the Scratch Live competition there. So DJs would bring your records, you have your set up, and go up in front of like a group of like 20 or 25 people that were there, and if you're like me, embarrass yourself to where they cut off the mic. So it was the last one I remember I did, and I had practiced my set for a while, and I had all my records marked where I was going to cue them. I had them in order. Well, I accidentally grabbed one record out of order, and it just threw me off, and I tried to recover from it. And it was just like I could see the guy in the audio booth, and he was like cut it off. I was waiting for like the big cane to pull me off stage.
Wow. So talk a little. I have no idea how that works. So you had records, you had vinyl,
Yeah.
and you had them. You set them up in an order, and you marked where you're going to start.
Usually use like those little circle colored dots that you'd put on like freezer food that you're gonna like mark a date or whatever. So I use those a lot to mark spots in the records where you want to start. Right? You might take a break or a beat or a vocal from one record and mix it with other ones, and if you're just doing that on the fly without marking them, it's any you don't know where to start. But yeah, so old school vinyl, man. Like I went to Purdue University for like a year and a half, and big school, big parties. People hired me to go DJ parties. The house I lived in, we always had parties that I DJ'd. I went to some parties that I'm like, I didn't think these parties existed in college, like straight out of like those college party movies.
Yeah.
And like to one where there was like an indoor pool in the house and people were riding jet skis around it. And I'm like, what is going on? So it was a good time.
Wow. So you see the shirt I'm wearing?
Yeah.
Right here.
Boilermakers.
Boilermakers. So we got another Boilermaker. So no, that's wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know you were, DJing at house parties. That's awesome.
It's always been my goal to kind of like get back into it just for fun, right? Like as somebody plays the saxophone for fun.
Yeah.
My equipment got destroyed or wrecked or whatever, and I just haven't. We were living in an apartment for like 5 years, me and my wife, so it got put in storage and I got wet and rained on and stuff. And I'm eventually gonna get them now that we have a house. Get someone now that we have a house, but it'll probably down the road. Wow. Houses are expensive if you didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. Oh wow! So Chris, thank you for that story. I did not realize that.
So, and the origin of my handle, DJ Crisco, actually has the worst, nerdiest like origin story you probably ever hear. You're like, oh yeah, maybe he's like the Crisco grease, like he's slick like butter, right? No,
that's what I thought.
No. So back in the day when I was a nerd in high school, I didn't have my friends played Magic the Gathering with me.
Yeah.
I would always like be not paying attention and they would be like, Chris go, Chris go, Chris go. So eventually my nickname just become Crisco. So
because you wouldn't take your turn in Magic.
Yeah.
Crisco.
So it's not a very like sexy story, right? It's
Oh my gosh, Chris, you have some good stories. I think you're full of other ones too, but
oh yeah.
All right. Yeah, so thank you for that. So Chad, I don't know if you have any stories like that where you
nothing as exciting as Chris.
Exciting as Chris. You didn't throw house parties or DJ at house parties. But I had a question for you, Chad, because I'm a BI person now, and I use Power BI to just take data and just crunch the numbers and get all these reports and insights from them. And Power BI is a magical tool. And you had told me that you teach Python, right? At your technology center. And Chris, do you do any Python?
We have not. The closest we've gotten is just like Raspberry Pi stuff.
Gotcha.
Right.
But Chad, I think you told me that a team of your students were able to go to a national competition and maybe won or something. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
So tell us their story. I'm kind of fascinated. What was the application and how did they do it?
Absolutely. So, one of the things, the reason for creating the Fab Lab really is to bring in all these different disciplines, which is part of engineering, right? You got the mechanical side of things, you got the electronics, you got the software, and then you got the design side of things, right? And of course, like Chris is saying, there is the business element that needs to be brought into it as well. So one of the things that I am very keen on and very strong on is how do I bring some of these different disciplines together into something that I can then engage students. Somebody who wants to do electronics can be working on electronics. Somebody who wants to work on the mechanical side of things can be doing the mechanical stuff. So it ended up in 2017, I was asked if we could put a team together for a competition called 4x4 in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was that you had to design and build a 4x4 car, which is about 1/18th scale. And basically, you had to maneuver and go around obstacles. Okay.
Okay.
But there was a requirement with this thing which said that you had to, if you're going through a tunnel, for example, or dark room area, the lights had to automatically come on. Because it's a 4x4 off-road car that you're simulating, if the car is at an angle of 25 degrees, that you have to sound an alarm. So now you are thinking about, okay, I have to put some electronics in that's going to detect angle, the tilt of the car, and then sound the alarm. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's how it all started. It started with, uh, you know, it is not just enough to do detection of the ambient light, because that's easy, right, Chris?
Yeah.
I mean, uh, so 2012, when Raspberry Pi first came out, I just went out and bought one immediately, right?
Yeah.
And started playing with it. And so in 2017, when we were asked to do the competition, we actually used the Raspberry Pi in this car to do the electronic side of things. But we didn't stop. It's simply detecting the angle as the car is maneuvering around the obstacles and the ambient light. We went a little bit further and said, okay, so what I want to be able to do is do geolocation of my car. So we added a gyroscope to it, and we said, okay, so now I know that my processor is running hot. I want to add something that's going to tell me what the temperature of the CPU is, so I can turn the fan on, for example.
Yeah.
So we started adding all these little sensors to the car. So 2017 was basically, we ended up with information that we were gathering. Then we were transmitting that information over Wi-Fi. And then we had an app that actually we created an app that ran on the iPhone, in the Android devices, and also on the laptops. And we used Java for doing that. So Java was basically easy to, you can write it for a Mac or PC. It's going to work. Raspberry Pi supports Java, so we actually had basically a monitor with a Pi, and it was collecting data that the car was basically sending it out over the Wi-Fi. Okay. So the following year, we decided, how how can I challenge the students to say, hey, you're collecting all this data. What can we do with it? So we said, okay, first we want to do is what if we came up with the concept of a completely autonomous car? And as a car is maneuvering and going around the course, if it sees a stop sign, it needs to stop. If it sees a yield sign, it needs to slow down. If it sees a right-hand turn sign, it needs to turn right or turn left. So now we're thinking, how can we do that? And this is where, we started looking at AI and how we could do that.
Okay.
So as it so happens, part of the competition in 2018 was that student had to present what the car of the future is going to look like. So we basically, the students wrote and demoed the road sign recognition program. So, we were about 70% on the ball as far as recognizing a road sign.
Yeah.
And the students were able to demonstrate that at the world competition. And then they talked about how cars could communicate to each other, with each other, as 5G technology is coming in. The reality, you can sort of see it around the corner, where a car is going to be able to communicate with the other car at such speeds that it can make decisions pretty fast on whether car A needs to slow down because car B is going to hit it at a crossroad, right? So those are sort of decisions now. So now looking at, okay, how can you intelligently do that? This is where AI comes in. This is where Python comes in. So back to Python. Why Python? Python is easy to learn. It became very prolific because of Raspberry Pi. Because Raspberry Pi is a computer that's $35. Price has not changed since 2012 when it first came out.
Yeah.
Now today you got a Raspberry Pi that's more powerful with more memory and they're a little bit more expensive, but you still got that $35 Raspberry Pi that you can buy today. Okay, and you can connect to it multiple sensors. So we demonstrated not only the road sign recognition program, we were able to autonomously parallel park 4x4 car.
Interesting.
Worked on that, and that was all done in Python.
Right.
Okay.
So Chris, some ideas for projects for your Fab Lab, I think. Right. So I have a question. So you had a Raspberry Pi on the vehicle. It was a 4x4 kind of an off-road thing. And you chose to do, it sounds like you sent the data off board to the Android device, and then you use Python to run the data manipulation and the AI on the Android device, or did you eventually put it on the Raspberry Pi itself?
So the roadside recognition wasn't in the car itself at the time. Okay. We actually used, and I'm going to show you this thing.
Yep.
I don't know if you can see this thing.
Yeah.
So this is actually a new version of a device from NVIDIA. But when we actually demoed our product at the World Championship, we had a slightly lower spec version of this device. It's called the Jetson Nano.
Yeah.
It's got the same pinout, Chris, as the Raspberry Pi on the GPIO side of things. So you can connect all the sensors that you can connect to the Raspberry Pi to this device, or the Jetson Nano. And so what we did was that we used a Jetson Nano to demo the AI component. So we used on the edge, what I call on the edge device, which is this thing. The model was actually created on a laptop workstation. So we basically trained the model on a Lenovo P73 laptop, which is really a workstation. And we processed 39,000 sets of data. And then created the final sort of model, and that model was then put onto the Jetson Nano, and so we were able. So the idea was that we're going to take this thing, put this thing in the car now, and use it to do the roadside recognition and all that.
So in 2018, for the presentation, you built it on the Jetson Nano, and then with the idea that when it was ready for implementation, you put it on the vehicle.
Correct. So the Raspberry Pi was basically used, like you said, we were collecting data. It was sending it over the Wi-Fi to devices like the iPhone, when all the graphics was done, right? So the apps that were on the iPhone, the Android, and by the way, the other app that we did was for the Microsoft HoloLens. So we actually had in the HoloLens, the car, as it's going around the track and going over the obstacles, you could actually see that in the HoloLens that is exactly what was going on, because we were taking the data from the gyroscope and displaying the XYZ information.
That's one of that's one of those toys that you mentioned. What equipment you would look to get or want to get? HoloLens 2. That's what we're actively seeking right now.
Right.
When does it show up, Chris?
we haven't necessarily nailed down a business case for it yet. Although we have like fragments of we know how it could be used.
Right. Well, Chad, we can send that application, the whole project, to Chris and be like, look, we can build an autonomous car and use this to.
Absolutely. It's projects like that you can go from AI, and buzzword today is, things like augmented reality, virtual reality, right? Again, one of the things that we're able to do is design something in CAD and then bring that into the AR world,
Yeah.
we can literally show the robot on a track, and we can sort of train students. They train themselves on maneuvering the course, right?
Yeah.
So it's really giving students the ability to learn state of the art technology. Well, just to high schools, it's state of the art, right? So by the time they go to college, they're going to be equipped with, knowledge to say, hey, this is really what I want to major in, right? The whole
Yeah.
idea, as far as I see it, is I want my students to find out really early what they don't like, because I don't want them to spend time on something they don't like. I really want them to spend time on something they think they're going to excel at
Right.
and be very good at when they go to college, right?
Yeah, no,
And,
that's a good point. It's I think these Fab Labs are phenomenal for that. It gives the kids exposure to many different things, and it takes down the barrier to entry for these students, because where can you go find pieces of equipment or this technology, right? Nowhere,
Right.
unless you go to a place like the Fab Lab. So
Right.
I'm going to switch it over to Chris real quick. So Chris, maybe you can kind of show us your favorite piece of equipment and maybe talk about that. And then, maybe from a, like a student perspective, what is one thing that where people come in and maybe they take a class or something and they leave and you're like, man, the jaws just dropped or the eyes got real big too, right? So talk a little bit about that too. So yeah, show us. So maybe do a show and tell on your favorite piece of equipment.
I mean, this is probably my favorite. There's something very earthly about using it's mirrored. So whenever I rotate this way, it's the opposite. The CNC router, like, even though it's not like you're not necessarily doing the work with your hands, because it's, the CNC does a lot of work,
Yep.
but there's something just, I don't know, primal about being able to cut wood on this thing, right? And then putting it together, like Tim Allen back in the day. Like this, we built this. One of my volunteers, the retired doctor, Dave Dietrich.
Yeah.
He built this stand here, and he cut a lot of the parts out on the router, right?
Wow.
So drawers and everything.
Yeah. Wow. Look at that.
So this is a sign jig that we made. So
Yeah.
when we were doing our last class that we did here, RIP classes, was a Big Brothers Big Sisters group back in late February, and the kids came in and they took sign blanks like this, and we taught them how to use the software to design their own signs, be it for their their room, their favorite sports team, whatever.
Wow.
But
Very cool.
the jig just helps us so that we can do things quickly.
Yeah.
That's one of the big things we had to learn really quickly is, a lot of times we'll get like a group of 12 that'll come in for like a Big Brothers Big Sisters thing.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, we got 2 hours. How do you teach somebody how to use software and the equipment and help them use those in that time? Like,
Right.
It's got to be simple stuff like this. Like, everybody gets the same size blank, right? These are your constraints.
Yeah.
And this is kind of cool because we use 3D printing actually to make the toe clamps.
Oh yeah. Yep. Oh, very cool.
So I like this. Let me see if I have any. There's a really cool example that I designed. It's a 6-pack holder.
Yep.
I did revision 1 last summer for a friend's wedding, and
Yep.
it was bad. It was really bad. So I went back and I was like, I can do this better, because the version that I did involved a lot of clamping and gluing, and I'm like, oh gosh, there's a better way. So this guy.
Look at that.
wow.
So and then
it slots together. So there's literally
the
what's up?
love.
Oh yeah, that's carved. Yep.
That's carved out with that CNC machine.
Yep. Use
Oh,
a different
wow.
bit. It's called a V-carve bit.
Oh, very
But
cool.
and it fit together. I was like, yes, this is perfect. And I sold a couple actually to some people. But
Wow.
it's pressure fit, right? So there's no fasteners, there's no glue. It's just easy. Put
Wow.
a sheet of
Just
pine
only the
down.
none? Yep.
So
Oh, very cool. So would you say that CNC router, the kids come in, they use that, and then they're just like, whoa, that was so much fun, and jaws drop? Or is there something else there that you really get a kick, the kids really, really enjoy?
the laser cutter.
The laser cutter.
I would have to say. I mean, 3D printing. So basically, our entryway drug to this place
Yep.
is 3D printing and the laser cutter.
Gotcha.
You know, that's how we get people started.
Yep.
For the most part, a lot of kids want to print Baby Yoda, right, on the 3D printers.
Yep.
But when people jump into the router or even cutting metal on our plasma cutter, I don't know where my examples for that are. Oh, right here. So like even cutting metal, like that's just not something that kids are used to, right? Like they can't just cut something out of metal every day.
Interesting.
There's a high school kid. He'd always come in here making laser cut stuff for his girlfriend, right? For like Valentine's Day, for her birthday, stuff like that.
Right. Oh, very cool.
This picture, I don't know if it'll show up. This is a 14-year-old girl that's a member here. So she makes these wooden earrings.
Oh, very cool.
If you can see that, that's one of the examples. But she actually has a store in Grand Haven that sells her products.
Wow. So, and how does that model work? So is there like a subscription to your Fab Lab? Is that how that works? And
like a gym membership.
Okay.
Monthly or yearly.
And then do you pay for raw materials and then the subscription covers time on the equipment?
So there's two models really out there in kind of the makerspace world. The model we kind of chose here was a lower price for the membership.
Yep.
But then you pay for time on the machines and materials depending on the machines. Some people can bring their own material for the router, right? Because that's very dependent on what your project is.
Yeah.
But for like the laser, we keep a lot of like plywood and stuff in stock, stuff that's hard to find, right? Or if you go to Home Depot and buy it, now you got to rip it down to size. So we keep stuff like that here.
Okay.
But so our membership, let's say for an adult, it's $250 for the year.
Yeah.
For students, $25 a year, any student, super cheap.
Wow.
And honestly, we were talking about upping the price before all this for the next year, but we'll probably just keep it the same now. But that's the membership fee, and then you pay for time in the machines. So most of the machines are, $30 an hour. The 3D printers are not. That's if it's little small stuff, we just let people do it.
Right.
But and then like for the printer, it's based on like what material they're using, how much material and ink they use, square foot or whatever, and and then there's some spots, like some makerspaces like Kalamazoo Makers, for instance, or i3 Detroit. i3 Detroit has been around for 10 years. Yeah. And their membership is like $50 or $60 a month, and that includes, basically access to everything.
Gotcha. So they go with a subscription that's higher, but it includes machine time and materials. Where you're going a full year for $250, but then you got to spend, you got to bring potentially materials or time on the machine, right? So interesting. So
and we're pretty chillax. Like if somebody's spending an hour and a half on a machine and we're messing up things for half of the hour and half hour, whatever, it's an hour, right? Or like stuff needs to be done around the lab here, like, hey, can you pick up that back area where we just had a class, and guess what, you can have an hour free laser time, stuff like that.
Well, I know you, so I know you're pretty chillax. I think there was a Facebook, you had like a inflatable pool, and you had and drinking a beer, so I was like, I know you're chillax. So but I'm gonna jump to Chad real quick. So
go for it.
We had talked about, so your Fab Lab, I think you had talked that you applied for a bunch of grants, right? Is that, so it started out with not a lot of equipment, but you built it out with grant applications and money for grants. And then I think you mentioned that it's not currently available to the public, which is harder for a school, but is there any thought about doing that for the public?
Absolutely. We did, up until recently, didn't have the space, right? So now we got the lab area itself is 4,800 square feet. Then we got 3 engineering classrooms that adjoin the lab. So now we can think about, okay, if we want to do something on a Saturday, bring in people, we will have a classroom to actually show them how the machine works, which is a question really I was going to ask Chris was, when somebody from community wants to come in and work on a machine, do they have to be trained, right?
Mm.
Now, our plan is that we will put a student or students with somebody from the community.
Yeah.
That way, the students will learn from that person, but the students will be able to help that person with running the 3D printer, for example, how to convert a part from SolidWorks uh, uh, to run on the 3D printer, stuff like that. So it's really trying to bring in collaboration between community and students. But that's going to take a little bit of time. Once, I reckon it's going to take us a year to get this thing up and running to the point where, it's going to produce some useful stuff, right? Because it's going to be all new, putting in all this equipment back into place. It's going to take a little bit of time. But that's the plan. The plan is that maybe 3 years down the road, we basically open it up to the community. We do a lot of work with industry. So that will still continue. We have a company down the road from us who basically donated soldering stations to our students for the Fab Lab. So we teach how soldering is done. They can get certified in things like that. So we offer as part of some of the classes, although we don't have a class that says that you are doing this certification or that certification. So for example, in CAD, we do want them to take SolidWorks Associate certification, and some students actually do the professional one. Okay, it allows us to sort of fine tune our curriculum to the need of the student. Okay, and the fact allows us to do that. So strong believer that if I'm doing something in CAD, I may want them to rapid prototype that very quickly, because it's one thing looking at a screen and a product. It's another thing when you can feel it in your hands, and you're trying to mesh two gears together. And now you're going to find that you forgot the tolerances and it's not meshing that well. Well, 3D printer enables you to do that very, very quickly, right? But that's our model right now. We definitely want our middle schools students to come into the lab. We encourage our high school students to go to middle school and work with them on robotics projects and stuff like that. But now that we got this big lab, we can say, okay, on a Saturday, we can bring them in, and high school students can work with middle school students or even elementary school students, right? And work on some of these exciting projects.
Oh, wow. So with this expansion, with the classrooms connected, you have plans now to kind of have people guiding others, students leading the community and bringing in more of the community. So, wow, sounds really good. And, I'm glad I connected you two. It sounds like there's a lot of collaboration all the way from Texas to Michigan, which is very cool. So we have an audience question. So Chris or Chad, I'm going to bring up the question. Do you recommend CNC router parts for hobby or Maslow?
I don't know the hobby, or maybe you meant hobby. I don't know. The Maslow printer, I've seen that actually. I've seen YouTube videos of it. I saw it in action. I was down at SolidWorks. Their 3D Experience World, like their big convention they do. Earlier in February, before COVID hit the fan. And I went to, whenever I go somewhere new, I like to go to the Makerspaces in the area. So I connected with some of the Nashville folks, and they actually had one of those Maslows. And have you seen that before?
I haven't.
It's a weird router. It's actually it's actually like on an angle, and the router machine part of it hangs with drawstrings and pulleys, and it moves around with pulleys. It's so weird. But they had good success with it. And once you can get it running, but supposedly you can build it for like $300-400 or something. Whereas like the ShopBot's like, $25,000.
Oh, so it comes as a kit. You can build your own, or
I think so. Yeah.
Wow.
It's like it's an open source thing, so you could source your own parts and all that stuff if you want.
Right. So you've seen these and for $300 to $400. And it sounds like he's asking, do you see a future for these open source kind of CNC machines?
Right. I mean, I can give you an example of two of my students. They graduated this year, and they've been with me from 9th grade. in this year's school year at home, they actually built their own CNC machine.
Oh, did they?
They
Okay.
started off by basically making it from plywood,
Yeah.
but then eventually, because some of the things that they wanted to machine, the vibration with wood and all that stuff, they decided that they were going to cut it out of aluminum. So they actually use a shopbot. We have a desktop, and we have figured out how to use a shopbot to cut aluminum, and they cut some of the parts for the CNC machine at the school. And now he's got this CNC machine in the garage that he's using. So yes, absolutely, absolutely.
I think it just pushes innovation. I've seen it with the 3D printing community. When you close source like the 3D printers, like when we first started here, we had non-open source 3D printers, and they were such a bear to work with, right? And you open that up to everybody to find a solution for your problems. Like Prusa, they integrate community solutions into their revisions if it's widely adopted.
Yeah.
In the future, I don't know if you've seen the conveyor belt 3D printers yet, but that was an open source community build, right?
Yeah.
It just took some maker tinker to like, I wonder if you could do that. And then,
it happened. Yeah. Oh, amazing. Like, I love it. Open source, how people collaborate, how, creative minds get together and make something incredible. So we're approaching 56 minutes. So I'm going to do a last call, and I've got a couple questions. So I'm going to ask Chad one real quick. So, I think this is important for the students out there, the ones for the future. But you told me once, Chad, that you had a student return to you and say that, I think he commented that he was grateful to you for letting him fail. Is that right? Is that the...
Yes.
Yeah. So if you can talk a little bit about that as a lesson learned for any younger, generations out there.
Right.
I think I'm failing every day now. I started my new business a year ago, and I kind of love it. It's like a choose your own adventure, and you run into these walls, but once you figure out your own solution, you're like, oh wow, that was kind of fun, and failing becomes kind of fun when you learn how to solve the problems. But I think a student came back to you and asked you or thanked you, right, for letting him fail. And
you sort of get comments like that, so the student who built the CNC machine was the same thing, right? He basically said, and he did a video saying that, thank you for helping me out. Thank you for letting me fail, because from failure, you said to me was, what lessons can be learned to fix it for the next project, right? So failure is okay as long as you learn from it.
Yeah.
But what you don't want to do is to spoon feed them, because by spoon feeding them, you are really taking away that creative thinking and innovation out of problem solving.
Yeah.
They're so used to saying, oh, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then if you miss out step 2, they turn around and say, well, you didn't teach me that, right?
Right.
And that's the thing, is that, students by nature they're scared of failing. And we really need to tell them and teach them it's okay. But you got to learn from your failure and improve and make it better.
Yeah, no, that's such a powerful thought. Thank you, Chad, for that. And Chris, we're going to piggyback on that. And do you have a lesson learned? And I know you've had some great experience. Like, you put yourself out there with the DJ thing. That was a great story earlier. And you were performing at house parties. Amazing, right? So
I don't think I could put that on a resume, though.
So impart some knowledge, man, for the viewers today.
Sure. The failing thing and the choose your own adventure thing, I both resonated with me, because people don't quite understand what spaces like Makerspaces or Fab Labs are. They're used to the consumer experience where you go to Target to buy jeans, you buy the jeans. Well, here you design the jeans, you make the jeans, you sell the jeans. So we try to guide people safely, but I would rather somebody, there's a lot of lessons we learn using the laser cutter with hidden vectors that will slice through your work. So I would rather, even if I notice it, but when I'm checking their work, I'd rather have them fail, and they'll learn more from that than they would if I just edit it for them.
Right.
And there's other big failures, like a lot of this equipment's pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
Like the first time we were going to cut something on that router, you know, it was terrifying. I didn't know what I was doing, right? You know, one of my volunteers you mentioned earlier, Jad, about you know, how members interact with this space, and we very much depend on volunteers or experts. You know, I had one guy that basically was in between work this last winter, and he came here like literally every day, figured this plasma machine out, and, you know, taught me a lot about how to use it. You know, the router. I had a doctor volunteer that did a lot with that, and like this Haas, right? It's a big machine, right? It's if you crash that, it's bad. If you crash the ShotBot, it's wood a little bit, so it's usually a little bit forgiving. Well, there's a dent in this block. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
One of the guys that was learning that machine, he was a member. He has a contracting, consulting, engineering business that he does. He'd come in here 2 days a week, went through the machine, went through some online stuff, learned how to use it. And here I'm giving tours to some admin it was during our homeschool day. I walk into the room and I hear a boom, probably the loudest boom you could ever imagine being in like a building. And here I am showing like these bigwigs the space. And then one of my Holly, who used to run our homeschool program, she comes up. I looked at her and I'm like, please go find out if that's bad or really bad. Right. But it was one of those things, like the guy that was learning it, you know, he thought he triple checked things and still missed it. Right. Thankfully it didn't cause any damage. Right. Which we'd have paid for, whatever, we're learning. But you know, if you're going to fail, you're going to fail. I mean, guess what he didn't do the next time he played with that machine?
Yeah, he knew that. Or he waited until, you know, the visitors were gone.
Right.
So Chris, that is you know, some great lessons there, and you know, I feel comfortable about going to the Fab Lab now and failing there, you know, crashing some machines. No, I won't crash them. But thank you so much, Chad and Chris, for spending time today, you know, imparting knowledge on the audience about, you know, what Makerspaces, what Fab Labs are, how your adventures, how your stories have turned out. And so we're going to end it on that note. And if you just can't hang on for a second, I'm going to end the broadcast and we'll have a little chat here. So thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.